When Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines in 2013, it killed over 6,000 people. The damage to infrastructure was catastrophic. The cost, about $3 billion. In August 2018, an Ebola epidemic was declared in the Democratic Republic of Congo. More than 2,200 people have died. When diseases strike, healthcare systems are often overwhelmed. Economic activity slows down. Governments have to address the ongoing disaster and recovery efforts. That usually strains fiscal budgets, especially for poorer economies. To help poorer countries cope with the healthcare crisis, the World Bank set up the Pandemic Emergency Financing, or PEF, facility. It was created following the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which stretched from 2014 to 2016. The PEF is made up of a cash window and an insurance window. The World Bank can draw on the cash window if the criteria for initiating payout from the insurance component is not met.
So there's actually monies there that the World Bank can pay to these countries in need when they request for funding. Germany donated about 50 million euros.
And if the criteria for the insurance payout is met, there will be an additional pool of funds for the countries in need. The insurance window has coverage up to $425 million. This is made up of a Class A and Class B pandemic bond issue totaling $320 million. The remaining $105 million comes from over-the-counter derivatives contracts.
If there's an event, what we call an eligible event that triggers a payout, the principal is then paid to the PEF trust fund. Okay. The PEF trust fund gets the money, it then puts it into the insurance window to be able to then meet requests from countries to request funding.
Investors of these pandemic bonds could potentially lose all of their principal. But if there's no major health emergency, they earn higher than average interest payments and get back their principal when the bonds mature this July. The idea is to let financial markets assume some of the risks of a healthcare crisis and lessen the financial burden on poor nations. In the 2018 Ebola epidemic in the Democratic Republic of Congo, $61.4 million was dispersed from the cash window. The bonds did not pay out, even though it was the world's second largest Ebola crisis on record. That's largely because almost all of the deaths were confined to only one country. But could the bonds be paid out soon? COVID-19 is among the 6 viruses covered by the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility. And the COVID-19 outbreak has met some predetermined conditions for payout. There are more than 4,500 reported deaths in more than 100 countries. This is already above the maximum requirement of 2,500 deaths. 7 countries have more than 20 deaths, beating the requirement for at least 2 countries with 20 deaths or more. The reported cases must fall within the World Health Organization's list of IBRD or IDA countries. IBRD stands for the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, while IDA stands for International Development Association. WHO has also declared the COVID-19 outbreak a global pandemic. Other conditions. 12 weeks must have passed since the start of the outbreak on December the 31st last year. This means that the earliest date for triggering the bonds will be March the 24th.
The actual distribution of the fund can only take place 84 days after the specified reporting date for such outbreak. So the WHO has issued such report on January 21st, 2020. So in other words, the investors or the countries that are affected will probably only be able to receive the distribution of the funds after middle of April of this year.
If all conditions are eventually met, the maximum payout is $195.8 million. Breaking down the numbers, $95 million comes from the drawdown of the entire principal from Class B notes, $37.5 million from the maximum 16.67% of principal reduction from the Class A tranche. This works out to a total of $132.5 million. The remaining $63.3 million comes from derivative contracts.
You have to hit quite a number of criteria for a certain duration and a certain number of cases, both confirmed cases and deaths, before you trigger the payout. And even then, the amount of payout is the percentage of the capital invested.
Even though the terms of this pandemic bond issue are complicated and critics say are heavily skewed towards investors, they provide a model for transferring pandemic risks to financial markets.
The details of the clause for this kind of pandemic illnesses should always be re-evaluated, right? Because we are only doing this for the first time, and I think that a lot of lessons that investors as well as the general public can learn from the experience, and then try to make a better construction going forward for this kind of financial products.
The World Bank is already preparing a second version of the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility. Pandemic bonds are one type of catastrophe bonds. There are also catastrophe bonds for natural disasters. Like a pandemic bond, certain predetermined conditions have to be met before the bond pays out.
It could be the typhoon wind speed. So the catastrophe bond will be triggered upon a certain extreme wind speed, and a payout would follow immediately, recording that trigger event.
The investor will lose part or all of their principal amount to cover losses or damages caused by such events. And if there's no such event that occurs during this specified time period, then the investor will obtain back their principal as well as the coupon payments until maturity.
The Philippines is the first Asian sovereign to issue catastrophe bonds. Other Asian economies like Indonesia and Thailand could follow suit.